Hey, hi, my name is Henry Gasko. This is an excerpt from the first part of the Sylkies. Peter flexed his left leg as he climbed out of the car. It had stiffened during the 4-hour trip from Melbourne, and then the banding, the tightness around his legs and waist had begun again. He sometimes imagined a torturer attending to him, face hidden inside a dark hood, applying the talents of a lifetime learning his craft. But instead of tying his hands and feet to a rack, this inquisitor used a simple belt, with finely spaced studs that were punched along its entire length. The torturer had first applied the belt to his left thigh almost 2 years ago. A very light pressure then, and Peter had ignored it for months. A minor irritation, nothing more. Days had often gone by when he'd felt nothing at all. But that was 2 years ago. The inquisitor visited him often these days, sometimes for hours on end. The belt would be pulled tighter and tighter, notch by notch. His left leg was still the favorite target, but in recent months the belt had sometimes been applied to his waist and occasionally to his upper arms. And then Peter knew that there was no mistaking the diagnosis. It suddenly seemed a very long way to the top of Feathertop. Peter glanced up to where the wind swirled the cold mist about in the treetops. A kookaburra on a branch overhead let out a raucous laugh, mocking all human achievement and endeavor. Right, the story is about a theme that I've been thinking about for some time, that there are things worse than death. And with that in mind, I came up with a story about a young man who's been diagnosed with a disease like multiple sclerosis, which means he's going to die young, and how he tries to make amends with his estranged father. Yes, that was the sort of the theme of it, but the actual image that first sparked the story occurred to me quite a long time ago, about 25 years ago. We owned a small property north of Melbourne in the country. I was down by the dam one afternoon when a wild storm blew up. It was very windy, lots of rain falling suddenly, lightning, etc. And I thought there are certainly some places in the world where humans possibly didn't really belong. And I remembered all the times we'd been bushwalking in the Australian Alps. Bushwalking is the Australian term for hiking. And I remembered climbing up to the track to Mount Feathertop, which is a mountain in the Alps, a number of times, and getting that same feeling that there are places where humans really don't really belong anymore. Well, the original idea occurred many, many years ago, and it stayed with me, as some ideas do. When I decided to try writing it, I spent quite a lot of time researching things like multiple sclerosis, because I wanted to make sure that that part of the story was realistic to balance the fantastical elements. And I wrote a very detailed plot outline because I wasn't quite sure how to go about it and how to structure it. When all that was written down, that took several weeks. The actual writing of the story probably only took about 3 or 4 days. Yeah, that's a really big question. Obviously, there are so many stories that are successful, as well as many that aren't successful, of course. I tend to be a traditionalist. I like stories that have a beginning and a middle and an end, a narrative structure of some sort instead of just a vignette or a slice of life. And I really think that a story must have some sort of kick to it. I don't like my stories to be too subtle. I like them to really have an impact. Even though the stories are about specific individuals in a specific time and place, the story somehow must have something that everyone can relate to, that must resonate with your own understanding of humanity and the human condition. Now, having said all that, I realize there are many exceptions, and one of my favorite stories is something called The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which has been called one of the best stories of the 20th century. And it really doesn't have a narrative at all, but it certainly has a kick, which is a result of an accumulation of details that build up to a picture of a troop of soldiers on combat duty in Vietnam. So there are many ways to write a good story, and hopefully we'll keep writing many, many good stories in the future. Right, okay, so tips as far as getting published. First of all, you have to be very resilient about this. You really have to realize that you're going to get rejections, probably quite a few of them. So the only thing I can say really is make sure that you are persistent about this, keep trying. My own favorite ways of getting published are to look at calls for submissions to either contests or to anthologies. These will often have a theme or some suggested topic, and I know for myself sometimes it's difficult to think about what I might want to write about next. And because there's a theme given in some of these works, some of these submissions, you can have a ready-made topic to write about. And along with that, I would have a look at a lot of Facebook posts or blogs that are out there that describe the submission calls that are available every week or every month for magazines that are out there on the market that are looking for material. There's a lot of people writing these days, but on the other hand, there's also a lot more outlets for stories these days than there used to be. So if you look for these blogs especially, people are writing up every month a list of contests, a list of people who are looking for submissions that month, and that's a good place to start to know where to send your material. But other than that, as I said, just be persistent, keep writing. Sometimes you'll make it, sometimes you won't, but if you don't keep writing, you certainly will not make it. Yes, the first story was actually something called Arthur's Aunt, which was published about 25 years ago or more in an Australian anthology called DreamWorks. And again, it was very easy. I just had an idea for a story, I wrote it down, and I sent it off, and it was accepted. And I thought that might be the beginning of a lifelong writing career, but in fact, that was the same year that my wife and I had our first child. So rather than writing at that time, I decided I had other priorities, and I spent the next 25 or so years making a living, raising our children. And it's only recently, in the last 4 or 5 years maybe, that I thought I might turn back to my original lifelong goal, if you like, of writing, and I've started to write on that now. But yeah, so the first story was about 25 years ago. The second story was only a few years ago. Okay, a bushwalk is the Australian term for hiking, where you take everything you need in a big backpack and you go up into the mountains or along some desolate stretch of beach or somewhere, and you go out for either a day or more often several days. Now, I haven't personally been on a bushwalk of any extended length for about 4 or 5 years because my wife has got fairly sore knees these days. The last time we went on an extended trip was in northern British Columbia about 4 years ago when we went on a big canoe trip, which isn't exactly a bushwalk, but it is a trip out into the bush. So no, I haven't been bushwalking for a number of years now, but we used to bushwalk almost every second or third weekend up into the Australian Alps or various other places around where we live. Okay, what's the great Australian dish? I know Australians eat a lot like Americans do, steak and all that sort of stuff. Lamb is a lot more popular here. There's something called a pavlova, which is very nice, which is named after, I think, a singer from the early 1900s, which is sort of a meringue topped with various kinds of fruit, often passion fruit syrup, possibly strawberries and so on, and then cream on top of all that. So that's a pretty nice little dish. We also have a tendency to put pineapple on our pizzas, which surprises a lot of people, but it's actually quite nice. So there's a few hints to look out for when you come to Australia. No, I think we're fine. Just to my wife, I guess. I would say that I'm really enjoying the work of someone named Scott Noel, who's publishing a magazine called Dreamforge in America these days, having a tough go of it with the virus situation and so on. But no, other than that, I think that's fine. Thank you.